Welcome to Sunny Brands, the podcast that highlights the companies that make the world a better place. I'm Eleazar, founder of Odd Notion, a branding agency and proud B Corp here in Portland, Oregon. And here are my co-hosts.
Hi, this is Rebecca, CEO and co-founder of the Impact Collective, also a certified B Corp in Portland, Oregon.
And I'm Sarah. I am the other co-founder of the Impact Collective. I know I always say this, but I'm always actually excited, but I am really excited for today's conversation. So today we're going to be talking about Patagonia. I think Patagonia is like the go-to brand for a B Corp explainer. Whenever I talk to anybody about what we do or about being a B Corp, I'm like, have you heard of B Corp? And they're like, no. I'm like, Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's, businesses that are good. And I think that there are a lot of reasons for why Patagonia is kind of the go-to. Super vocal, high scoring, one of the original sort of like first movers in the movement. So I'm really excited to get into this conversation. And I'm also excited to maybe try to take some different angles that have not been beaten to death in 1,000 podcasts before.
Yeah, what else could you say about Patagonia? But,
In that spirit, you said you always have a lot of energy. Do you drink coffee?
I drink a lot of Red Bull sometimes.
Oh, okay.
On special occasions,
Okay,
like
got it.
podcast
That's where
recording
that's coming
days.
from.
Yeah.
Got it.
I mostly
Okay.
stick to tea. That's why I'm low energy.
So yeah, I'm pretty hopped up and pretty hyped up. So,
Let's go.
So we're going to talk about Patagonia. This is a little bit like the Lego one where it's like, if you don't know who Patagonia is. But so Patagonia is an outdoor apparel company. And they're known for their high quality gear and strong commitment to environmental and social responsibility. There's a lot of innovations that they had made in terms of the outdoor apparel space. But I would say, they are equally as known for their outspoken commitment and activism in social and environmental things. So I think one of the things I want to start us off with is setting the tone for who Patagonia is culturally. So Patagonia was founded in 1973 by Yvonne Chouinard. So he was a rock climber. So this is pre-Patagonia. This is sort of how he got here. So he was a rock climber who actually learned blacksmithing in order to make his own climbing gear. So,
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So he was a big rock climber and, sort of recognized that the gear he was using did not suit his needs very well. That spirit of innovation and sort of like, how might we find,
Talk about dedication to a problem. That's
Yes.
a true social entrepreneur.
Yeah. Like learning an entire trade in order to solve a problem.
Blacksmith? I can't recall any brands that I know that have started from that.
As a blacksmith.
Yeah.
So he learned blacksmithing and in 1965 started Chouinard Equipment. So they redesigned and improved almost every climbing tool in order to make them stronger, lighter, simpler, and more functional. So again, this is like a big leap. So, to start this whole company and then to really say, so we found this problem with this one piece of gear. How can we innovate and kind of, move that into other areas? So by 1970, they were the largest supplier of climbing equipment in the United States. And there's a reason why we're not talking about Chouinard Equipment as the number one, B Corp in the world. So they became the largest supplier, and they also became a villain. So basically, they had these, I believe it's pronounced Pittons, P-I-T-O-N-S. I rock climbed for like 6 months in middle school, so I don't know the names of all of them. But there was a specific product they were making, and it had to be repeatedly hammered into the routes. So for outdoor climbers, they're creating their own routes, they have to hammer into the rock. And so this specific piece of material was creating cracks in the rock that were really sort of visible, detrimental, and the community recognize them. So what's interesting is that, this is one of those first little pivots, right? Where, they're one of the largest manufacturing companies of climbing gear. They're obviously really successful, but instead of going like, fuck it, let's just keep making money and doing this thing, they chose to minimize that part of the business. And they ended up making an alternative, which were these aluminum chocks that could be wedged into the cracks to kind of slip the rope through rather than hammered into the rock. So not only did they kind of pivot away from the thing that was harming the environment, they actually innovated to find a new mechanism.
This is before Patagonia.
Yes, this is before Patagonia. Yeah.
Interesting.
So those could be wedged rather than hammered into the rock.
Yeah.
So again, the pittons became obsolete with these aluminum chalks. So, this is like setting this foundational tone of like a member of a community is seeking solutions. This is stakeholder engagement at its finest, right? Just like recognizing a problem, seeking solutions, sort of like referring to your community, listening to feedback, continuing to innovate. So the clothing side of things came in sort of the same manner. So Chouinard took a trip to Scotland. He bought some rugby shirts, and it turns out they were really great for climbing in. These rugby shirts were really durable. I mean, the sport of rugby is very contact heavy, and so the materials had to be really durable. And then the collars of the rugby shirts ended up being really beneficial in climbing because when you're climbing, you're strapping harnesses and ropes and gear sort of around your neck, and so they would protect the neck. And so that's really like where Patagonia started. So he started bringing some of these rugby shirts back in. And then that Patagonia was born. So again, this whole sort of like spirit of innovation, listening to the community, solving problems, innovative spirit was baked in from the beginning. And so, I think that there's been a lot of conversation around like the let my people go surfing and the like B Corp and all of that stuff, like Patagonia has been driven by like direct need and cognizant of direct impacts. So they're solving a problem and then kind of assessing how that's going. So I think that the thing that I want to talk a little bit about is actually their activism. From this like spirit of innovation and all of this, what's really interesting, and there's lots documented on their website in terms of like how this all came about, but a couple of things I wanted to kind of focus on. So like education goes hand in hand with their activism. Something that I was really interested in and impressed by was how much sort of internal education they would do around the issues that they were sort of exploring, but also then education, and this isn't an activism piece, but like in their early days when they were innovating around materials in their catalog, they wrote a whole article for consumers about how to layer these materials, how to layer them with their other gear in cold weather, for wicking, for moisture, for all of this stuff. And so really this like, it's very transparent in a way that is not necessarily like that present in a whole lot of businesses. There was a whole lot of transparency of sharing learnings and wanting to invite the community in. The fine point on this that I want to talk about is like Patagonia is aware of the long arc of history and the long arc of change. So we know that they recently came up with a new mission statement of we're in the business to save our home planet. And so thinking about their early days, it was this small clothing company in California. And one of the things that they said is that they slowly became aware that uphill battles fought by small dedicated groups of people to save patches of habitat could yield significant results. So this sort of hyper focus from small and dedicated groups. They have an example on their website that they talk about that a group of Patagonia, people went to a city council meeting to help protect a local surf break from a development plan. They saw somebody come to that meeting, share really tangible impacts of how, I think it was the trout were being impacted by these developments in the surf break. And inevitably that development was shut down and did not go through. This seems to be like a really pivotal story in the history of Patagonia to recognize like this sort of direct action of passion towards a really specific subject could yield results. And I think that especially today, I don't know, it's hard. I wanted to feel inspired by that and still think like, oh, today, like we could still, if a small group of us are just passionate enough. And I don't know. I think I don't know if that's
small group plus a small group plus a small group. Maybe that's how.
Small group plus all the small groups.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that there was something really profound in that was possible. And so what's interesting is that the person, I believe his name was Mark Capelli, was actually the biology student at the city council meeting who presented that information. Patagonia gave him a job. They said, we gave Mark office space and a mailbox and small contributions to help him fight the river's battles. As more development plans cropped up, the Friends of the Ventura River worked to defeat them, to clean up the water and increase its flow. Mark taught us two important lessons: that a grassroots effort could make a difference, and that degraded habitat could, with effort, be restored. His work inspired us. So I think that's also one of these things that we look at with the way that Patagonia has operated since its inception, is like, is that we can make a difference and we can repair, which is a key thing, like thinking about like repairing the environment and the efforts that are required.
Right.
So from there, they started making more donations, started engaging in more activism. They hold a Tools for Grassroots Activists conference every 2 years to teach these skills and all of this marketing, like campaign and publicity skills. And they bring in experts.
I didn't know any of this stuff.
I know,
Yeah.
and it's like, I think we think about Patagonia and like their activism. And I think sometimes, like, at least for me, I think about it on a grander scale. I think about the big sort of flashy stuff we hear about, but it was really, impactful for me to learn about like the foundations of it and sort of like from its inception. And also I think really inspiring to see the continuity, like that a company could start with this sort of intended impact at its core in the 70s, could grow to be one of arguably the most successful brands in the world. And they've maintained this integrity throughout.
Right.
Yeah, it's so clear that I think I've heard Yvonne Chouinard talk about this, that he's always seen the company as a vehicle for good. So it's like, and that is clear throughout, using the company as a resource to make whatever impact that they care, which for them is the planet. Right?
Yeah.
To me, it's always so far like the thing that the thread that I see is the passion, the core belief that I won't make anything that harms the planet. You're seeing it from, I don't want to drill into rocks, which is something like, okay, context, like El Capitan, which is like a massive rock, you know?
Yeah.
So people were like, I mean, come on, bro. Like,
what's one crack?
Yeah, what's one crack? Yeah,
Totally.
you can definitely like make that argument.
Yeah.
Well, it starts with a crack, I believe.
Yeah. But
Anyways.
even having that level of passion for that principle.
Yeah.
And again, I'm fascinated by founder stories and how their companies tend to have like a connector when it comes to values, and the connector that I'm putting together is, okay, he started with that, and that same thread of values continued all the way to Patagonia. So I think a good question for founders is like, what is this thing that you really, really care about?
Yeah.
And how can you infuse that into the brand?
Yeah. Well, and there's also a willingness to listen, to learn, to keep doing better. Like some companies that don't care about impact do bad, and then they just want to hide it, right? Like they're pretty open about like, this had this negative impact and this is how we fix it. You know, that's admirable as well, and builds trust with the community, I think.
And it sounds like I would kind of argue, like today, that's not how they talk in terms of like what they're saying, like, this is what we care about. It did start with this problem that he had as a climber. And it started with that tool that he wants to fix. But then in that, he probably started to uncover, like, by doing this, I'm harming this, and my actions have an effect.
Yeah.
And so, that was probably like a click moment. It was like,
well, and that's the thing, is I think this season we've talked about a lot of different like mechanisms and modes of impact, right? And you know, if you think about it, like if the definition of a social enterprise is a company that was created to solve a social or environmental problem, Patagonia wasn't, right? So early stages, they were created to solve a climbing problem, right? Like a problem that rock climbers were experiencing.
Right.
And throughout like the and throughout their history, these problems started coming up, these passions started coming up that were in line with that, right? Because, you know, it like inherently, if you are somebody who is passionate about like the outdoors and rock climbing and all of this, like I'm sure there are some shitty rock climbers who don't care about nature, but like for most people who engage in this type of stuff, that's a key component of it, right?
Yeah.
So protecting it, and it has kind of evolved into this.
Yeah, well, they have such a direct relationship with the earth too. Like imagine if we had those types of relationships with all our stakeholders, right? If you're literally like touching it every day.
Yeah.
Like you're that much more connected to the impact that you're having. And that, just imagine if you could be that close with, like, that's the thing about a lot of businesses, especially when supply chain comes into it, product businesses, we're so detached from the impact that we're having, or companies are, that makes it really easy to not think about the negative impacts, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
It's just such a good thing. I just piggyback on what you're saying. Like when I'm in strategy sessions with folks, I think a good question probably that we should bring up is, have you thought about the impact of the thing that you're making?
Yeah.
Or have you thought about the impact of the services that you're providing?
Yeah. And the potential negative impacts too. Like, you know, on all different facets too. Yeah.
Speaking of potential negative impacts, I think that this is yet another thing, right? So like Earth is our only shareholder, then stop making stuff, right? Like there's this weird disconnect that's like, okay, well, if, I don't know, like manufacturing and all of this stuff, like, isn't that inherently sort of in juxtaposition with that mission? And I think one of the things that's interesting of digging into Patagonia, one of the things they talk about too is they said early on began initial steps to reduce our own role as a corporate polluter, right? So this acknowledgement and recognition that like, despite the fact that they didn't begin the business to solve an environmental problem, they had created one and they were responsible for solving it. And so they have been really innovative and first movers in a lot of areas in terms of like recycled materials, innovative materials, and then like dyes and toxins and all of that stuff. So in 2007, they made their first efforts public, the good and the bad. They launched something called the Footprint Chronicles. So, environmental footprint, kind of like laying all of those pieces out. And arguably, in the last 17 years, they've made significant progress and improvement in those areas. So one of the other pieces too is that in 2018, they launched the Patagonia Action Works, and that's to connect their customers with the environmental action groups they support. So this is like another evolution of their activism. So, previously like they were providing direct support, and then the Patagonia Action Works is actually expanding the impact of that and allowing customers access. And it's really cool. I was looking through the site and it's like you can search by city, state, zip code, and you can find, and here in Oregon, no surprise, there's several that they support. And they provide like direct action. So you can sign petitions, you can donate, you can volunteer, sign up for newsletters. And so I think that like there are all of these ways that like, especially right now, it feels really overwhelming of like, how do I figure out how to like get involved in things I care about and things I feel passionate about? And I think that it's so like important for organizations like Patagonia, who have been doing the work for a long time and have developed relationships, to then figure out like, how can we amplify this? How can we create more connections? And I think that what's really cool too is, so they did the action networks to support customers to the organizations that they are supporting. And then part of their employee benefits actually encourage employee activism. So they provide 18 paid activism hours per year. And so I know some companies do like volunteer time off, or so they have like activism TO. Yep. ATO. I guess they have some ATO. And then those hours are to engage with and give back to their communities in meaningful ways. One thing, like I know we worked with a client to develop their volunteer time off policy. I'd be really curious to learn more about that, about what the specifics look like. Are there any like justifications they have to provide, or can they only do that in certain ways? But, having that is very cool.
What if it's activism on the wrong side?
Yeah. Like, are you allowed to? For pipelines? They also offer a unique bail assistance program. So employees who are arrested or detained while exercising their First Amendment rights as they stand boldly in defense of a brighter future. So if you get arrested protesting, Patagonia has a bail defense fund.
That's
nice.
dope.
Yeah. That's great.
Not to poke at each one of these, but the other thing too, it was interesting that I read, it wasn't so on the employee benefits page, it just specifically says like, while exercising their First Amendment rights. There was more language I read somewhere about like peacefully protesting, and people have various opinions or feelings about the concept of peaceful protest, and what that constitutes and when, but So they have a bail assistance program, which is very cool. And then they are also one of the few companies in the U.S. that provides time off for election activism specifically. So they have a vote early and volunteer day. Sometimes I can't believe that the election, election day, isn't a national holiday. There's a lot of reasons for that, voter suppression being one of them. Anyway, Patagonia gives all of their employees time off to vote early and get involved. And so it's and they say specifically, gives our people time off to protect the health of our democracy through civic participation and encourages them to vote and get involved in general, primary, and special elections. And I just, I think the thing about everything that Patagonia is talking about here is really this their insides matching their outsides in so many ways, and also a progressive increase in activities, starting from the beginning, and then as their capital grows, as their employees grow, kind of finding ways to continue to serve that. And so I loved seeing that. And I think there's some even more significant ways that they've continued to grow that commitment.
One thing I wanted to start with, because you're talking about their progression. It's really interesting. We've kind of talked about this season about how Patagonia, in terms of their business model, in terms of making an impact, like you were saying, first it was like a side thing. Patagonia made clothes, and then they did grants on the side for Friends of Blank River and stuff. So that's kind of how their impact started. But it's interesting to me. I used to think that you had to, if you were going to solve a social or environmental problem as a company, it had to be from your founding. But Patagonia actually shows that you can continue to make that more and more integrated into your business model. So they started as it really separate, and they kept doing more and more things to bring it into their business model. They, over the 50 years that they've been around, of course, their materials, they only use organic cotton. They have, a lot of principles of circularity, as some of the things that Sarah talked about, mending clothing in stores now, and taking back clothing, and they have worn wear, which it's actually a new revenue stream for them, where they resell old clothing. But the really cool thing is Patagonia Provisions, which was founded in 2012. And I think this is this to me is their pinnacle of all the way to the other side, where every product they have through Patagonia Provisions, and they sell things like seafood and
I've seen that.
Yeah,
I may have a problem with it, but sure.
You have a problem with it? Let's
brand alignment.
I see.
Okay.
Actually, I have a quote about it. Yvonne Chouinard said, people need a new jacket every 5 or 10 years, but they eat 3 times a day. So they saw this as
good
if
punch.
what we care about, what we care about is the planet. We can only have, to your point, only have so much impact if we're just making clothing.
Yeah.
They're we can actually have an impact on the food system. So
their why is, as much as I can deduct it is Earth is our only shareholder. We're in the business to save our planet. So technically, the what of that could look a million different ways.
Exactly.
And so because they're not an apparel company. That's not how they describe themselves.
Yeah.
That's not their why.
Not now.
It's just the what.
Yeah.
Apparel is just one of the ways that they did it. Before they were even Patagonia, they were doing it through climbing gear.
Yeah.
So
Self-scorch.
Point taken.
I mean, they went from, what were they called? Pittons? To clothing. That seems like a big pivot.
Yeah, technically, they can be like the Apple of saving the planet, because Apple is phones and this and cars eventually and all this different stuff. So the Patagonia can just be we're gonna do that through all these different touch points, and that would fit within their brand.
And they're big enough, go for it, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so the cool thing about Patagonia Provisions is that every single product solves an environmental problem, solves some kind of problem in the food system.
That's dope.
So it's completely integrated into the business model at that point. One of the cool things is, have you heard about Kernza? Have you heard about this new grain?
Nope.
It's I don't think it's a new grain, but I read that it was domesticated in 2013 or something, but specifically because it's a perennial grain, meaning you don't have to you plant it once and you can just keep harvesting it every year, which means it has less impact on the land, needs less water, fewer herbicides, less energy. And they're using this to make beer. So Hopworks, local B Corp Hopworks has beer that's made with this. So it's pretty cool.
And the fact that you even have a product like this means there's someone very nerdy in their team who understands all of this and who's thinking very strategically and thoughtfully about creating products that are delivering on that promise on their why.
Yeah, exactly. So again, I just thought it was cool that like they're so committed to keep doing better, right? And I think that's such a big piece of this movement is that like don't rest on your laurels. Like there's always more to do.
And I think one other thing that you were talking about at the beginning was this evolution. And I go back to, when I think about that, I think about brands as people, which is an analogy that we use a lot with our clients. Like people change and people evolve, people mature, people grow in their understanding about themselves. If you do gone through a lot of therapy like I have, like you mature, you learn a lot about yourself. And I think brands are very similar in that way, that maybe let's assume Patagonia went through therapy after when they first started, right after they did the climbing gear. It's like, man, we created this thing and it really bothered me that I was destroying a rock that is part of nature. And then the more they resonated with that idea, just like therapy, you're like, oh, it bothered me because I care about the earth. And then you start to compound actions on top of that and you start to say, I'm not about apparel. My thing's not about apparel. Like, that's not what I care about. What I care about is this. And you can see that in the progression of almost like an understanding of like, what business are you in?
You know, and it's interesting because there's the whole, I also see like a maturation happen sort of after, so in 1991, they had a big layoff. I think it was 20% of their staff they had to lay off. They hit a downturn, you know, and it's like there's some kind of evolution, like the let my people go surfing kind of thing, which is like, you know, when you think about like, I think that was another like era of Patagonia where the purpose of it was to provide a job where people could still connect, like, so make a living and still connect with the outdoors, right? There was a lot of stuff around like employee culture, innovation, and all of that. And then when they had to lay off 20% of their staff, it was like, oh shit, are we a resilient business, right? Like, are we back to business? Do we need to get back to our business principles? You know, it's like, it's a huge spectrum of all the things you have to worry about to have a successful business like that.
I was listening to an interview with Yvonne Chouinard, and he talks about one of the interesting things for Patagonia is like, obviously they could have gone public. That was an intentional decision never to do that, because when you go public, you have these short-term, you have to have short-term results, right? And he was talking about how Patagonia believes in growing strong and not fat. And I think, to your point, like that allows for like some, you know, downturns are hard, but they also have some years where they only grow 2% and some years where they grow 20%. And they can be a little bit more adaptable to like, that's, speaking of therapy, you know, that road is not straight, right? Like it, and why businesses should be allowed to operate that way too, right? You know, so.
But that's a key highlight. Becoming a public company doesn't allow for you to grow at sometimes at a helpful pace. Which is interesting. We looked at a publicly traded company that's a B Corp, and it's and there's a few publicly traded B Corps, but that's interesting to me. Like how long-term thinking can you be if you're publicly traded? I'm not so sure that's even possible at this point. Interesting.
Yeah. So speaking of long-term, governance, my favorite topic. We have been talking about how it was actually in 2022 that Patagonia announced that Earth is now our only shareholder. And what they're talking about is they decided to form a perpetual purpose trust. So this is all around the concept of steward ownership. So basically, rather than I think it was Yvonne Chouinard and his family that owned all the stock for Patagonia for a long time. He was thinking about the long term, like, how do I protect this Earth being who they want to protect? How do I do that long term? Because the guy's old and he's thinking about, he's not going to be around forever. And he's thinking, how do I set up this company for the long term? So they decided on this model of steward ownership, meaning they separate the economic rights, so the money rights, from the voting rights, which is different from publicly traded shareholder primacy models. So I'll go back a little bit. So Patagonia has always, we've been talking about, has always been about doing business differently. I talked about Yvonne Chouinard saying they want to grow stronger and not fatter. They basically, and actually they have so this is the coolest title ever, director of philosophy at the company. His name's Vincent Stanley. He said, his quote, "If you're looking at what's happening next quarter, or if you're looking at selling your company, social and environmental health doesn't matter as much. If you want to be in business 100 years from now, you care about the long-term success of all your stakeholders."
Interesting.
Yeah, which is what we've been talking about. Like, imagine if the way that you report on your business's success is looking at 100 years in the future. Like, how different that might be.
What if we had like a public company set up but for purpose company that had that same cadence of progress,
right,
of speed, and like, this year, what do?
What if we reported every 100 years? Like, could you imagine?
But I guess it's what impact reports are trying to do.
But they're still yearly. If you're expected to show progress every year, I don't know. Maybe there's a different way. Now I'm thinking, like,
I mean, my husband has great and robust ideas about how there should be a B Corp, like stock market, and publicly traded. And I'm joking. It's not a good idea.
It wouldn't be day traded. There'd be like year trading. Maybe.
Like you can only make trades every 18 months or something. Oh man.
All
right, let's do it.
We're on to something. We make things happen. Let's do it.
Well, why is that a bad idea?
Well, anyways, so how Patagonia has been thinking about this. They were part of one of the founding companies for 1% for the Planet, which both of our companies are 1% for the Planet. That was kind of their first move into locking in their purpose into their structure, which means 1% of the revenues go to nonprofits that are for the planet, that are doing good for the planet. Then they became a B Corp, which we've talked about. But a big thing, talking about advocacy, so a big part of B Corp is what's called mission lock, meaning that you need to protect your purpose in your legal structure somehow. There didn't used to be a mechanism for that until Patagonia was kind of part of creating the benefit corporation movement. And they were the first benefit corporation in California,
I did not know that.
Yeah. So thanks to them, we are a benefit corp. You're a social purpose corporation.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. And I heard a story that Yvonne Chouinard actually went to the courthouse or whatever to actually become in California to become the first benefit corporation.
That's badass.
Yeah, I know. Really cool. Ugh. So, they've always been on the leading edge. But that wasn't enough. So thinking about the future, they realized they need some kind of structure in place to protect their purpose long term. And I mentioned the perpetual purpose trust. That is what they decided to do in 2022. So what that did was basically transferred all of their 100% of their voting stock into a trust, the perpetual purpose trust, which has all voting rights for the corporation. And then 100% of their non-voting stock, so all of the economic rights, the money, basically, it goes into a nonprofit called the Hold Fast Collective. So the perpetual purpose trust protects the company's purpose and values. So the voting rights for the company and for the rest of time lie with this trust and cannot be sold. So the one question I have is the members of the trust are family, which that's still a little bit it's hard relying on people, but who knows? I assume the family's cool, but we'll see what happens.
But is it just let me play it out real quick. I own 100% of the company, and I made a decision to say I'm not gonna own any 0% of the company. Is that basically what he did?
Yeah. He said all of the profits are going to go into basically all of the profits that don't go back into the company are paid out in dividends to these nonprofits.
Got it.
But then the decisions about how the company's going to be run are over here.
Gotcha.
So those are separate entities. So basically, it's separating. This nonprofit can't make decisions that are meant to like increase profits for its own behalf. That's a separate thing.
Okay. So at least there's no legally a way for them to pocket any money. It's legally pretty secured and safe.
Right.
To do it the way they did it.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because it's like, it reminds me of, I remember hearing stories about like, you know, such and such company has a board seat for like the environment or has a board seat for like the future, you know, and when I hear things like that, I'm like, oh, love it. Like, that's so cool. And then I'm like, wait a minute.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? And I remember there's a company, I think it's in the UK, and I dug into it a little bit more, and they have a board seat that's for the environment. So a voting, you know, member that is the environment, and the representative of the environment is an environmental lawyer. And so, you know, it's like, because I always wondered like, well, how would that work? And, you know, there's still decision making that has to happen. You know, and it's like, I'm rarely the one to say it, but like, you know, setting up those structures and then like having to believe that like the people behind it are making the right choices and like making choices in line with the mission, you know, I guess we'll find out.
Yeah. I mean, what is really cool about this is that, you know, we talked about OpenAI where this was really messy around where the profit motivation lies versus the mission, that it got really messy and basically it all fell apart. They're purposely making those separate. So all money related things are over here, all voting related things are over here. So they're basically saying no matter how much Patagonia grows, like it's not going to have an impact on the purpose, right? Like that's going to remain the same.
I haven't seen a more noble, double down on your mission act by any brand ever.
Yeah.
So here, you know, not to be a cynic, but also like, that dude's a billionaire.
Yeah.
Like that dude's got a lot of money. Yeah. Right. So it's like, you know, I think the question becomes, you know, and again, like, I think it's amazing. I think it's like super cool and really interesting and a model that I'd love to see more people do. You know, it's also this thing of like when you have financial safety and security and then you're capable of thinking about those types of decisions, right? Like what might it look like, you know, and again, like, I don't think that perpetual purpose, we could become a perpetual purchase trust. God, that's a hard thing to say. You know, but like, you know, again, I think it's sort of like what we were talking about a little bit in the Lego episode about like what's possible, right? Look at what's possible when you have sort of like the financial security to then think about, not that Patagonia hasn't been doing that for a long time, but yeah.
Well, that is one issue though. So the perpetual purpose trust model, I think was only started in 2018. So it's pretty new. We have talked a little bit in this season about like these types of models they either don't exist or they're new. So there's a lot of things to be figured out, but it is like inaccessible at this point. Like, yeah, Patagonia has the resources to make this happen. I'm sure there were a lot of legal fees and all that stuff. Yeah, companies like ours, that's not really available to us at this point. But it is something that we, you know, when I want to retire in 50 years, maybe I'll have the resources then. But yeah, it's just it's cool though. Like so many things are changing. I think that's the cool thing about Patagonia is like they have like been a part of just creating whatever is the next thing because they're so committed to this journey to figure out a way to do business that's good for people on the planet. And if it doesn't exist, they're like, okay, we're going to create it. So that's the part that's inspiring. And yeah, more advocacy for things like this.
That's dope. I think that the thing that I have learned that really when I was like diving into Patagonia, and again, yes, I'm a very new B Corp and I knew that there are B Corp and they're like my go-to for understanding like, okay, got it. And we haven't talked about apparel at all in this conversation, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I know.
But it's secondary.
But I think it lines up with this thing that I found on their website that I found very, very interesting. They say, fashion is none of our business. We are in the business of saving our planet. Fashion got nothing to do with it. I was like,
damn.
Yeah, positioning.
Yeah.
Big conversation here. And I think for the audience, just like positioning, the easiest way to describe it is there is a corner in your brain that you're designating to a brand. And that brand paid a lot of money to own that piece of land in your brain. So when you think about healthy grocery store, what grocery store comes to mind?
Whole Foods.
Whole Foods?
Ugh.
New Seasons.
I thought Whole Foods first too.
I know, which
is annoying.
I like New Seasons more though. I should have said New Seasons. Sorry.
That means both of those. When you're driving and you're about to stop for groceries, that's worth a lot of money because every time you're driving, you're gonna think, I want healthy groceries, and this is where I'm gonna go do that. So when we think about positioning, which is one of the biggest conversations we have with our clients, is what corner of the brain do you want to occupy in your consumer's brain? And Patagonia is saying we want to occupy the planet corner.
Yeah.
If you're gonna buy anything and you want to be 1,000% sure that it is benefiting the planet, you can buy from us. That's a very different positioning than saying we're a climbing gear company or an apparel company, or like that. Their competitors are like REI, Cotopaxi, North Face, Columbia. They are that positioning makes them very unique in that lineup. And Cotopaxi is like also like very invested in the planet as well. But like that way of talking just locks them in a place in my brain, if I'm a conscious consumer, for them to be the top for me to think of when I'm thinking about purchasing as a climber, and I want to I want a 1,000% certainty that what I'm buying is benefiting the planet.
Well, and the positioning, I know. Well, and the positioning too, it's also a piece where it's like, because Patagonia is expensive.
Yes.
And it's like, but at least for me, it's like when I'm making those purchases in line with my values, where I have that confidence in that sticker shock is a little bit less.
Yeah. So like the question is, and what business are you in? We heard, I watch Shark Tank a lot, like I love like hearing the whole, like how it's a build and where the money's coming from, all that. And they ask, like, Mark Cuban is notorious for always asking, like, you're in the wrong business. Like, this is not the business that you're in. Like, you're actually about this. And you can see the person who's raising money is like shocked, like, oh.
Yeah.
And that is a brand thing. Like not understanding what business you're in, that is helpful for business, but it's also helpful for helping other people make a decision about your product. And it's very, very important. And it's really the break it or lose it for your brand, because your product might be amazing. You may just not be positioning in people's minds in the place that it needs to be positioned when it comes to your competitors. You're not helping people make a choice about you. Which is why I have a job. So thank you. But their why is Earth is our only shareholder. We're in the business to save the planet. That's their why at the very center. So we have 3 circles: why, how, what. Why is at the very center. Their who is outdoor enthusiasts, conscious consumers, urban leisure style seekers. Style seekers, not sure about that. Like that, they said. Fashion is
maybe
not business.
Maybe not your style.
Yeah.
Interesting.
They're saying they don't care about fashion.
Yeah.
So
maybe Earth style.
So maybe it goes along with one of the things I love about them is their tone and voice. So the tone and voice is like how words are used with branding. And this is just a note for everybody listening. Like when people think about branding and they come to us, one of the nice surprises that they find is that when we say branding, we're thinking about the whole person, the whole brand. And brands have a look, but they also have a tone and voice, personality. And they need to be able to speak in certain ways to certain consumers. So one of the things that we work on is typically coming up with a tone and voice for the brand, depending on who, to be able to be flexible depending on the consumer that they're talking to. So just do it for Nike. It's commanding. It's like competition, getting it, you know? Just do it. Just do what?
Yeah.
Like if you have no context for who they are. If you have no context for it. So that just falls. The reason why I brought up just do it is, and I make fun of it, is because a lot of people are like, they think that a tagline, which is what just do it is, think that it needs to be descriptive, and it doesn't always need to be descriptive. It depends on your positioning.
Yeah.
Who are you talking to, and what does that need to say? I think tone and voice, when you're working on branding or branding for your business, like really thinking about how it communicates, is just as important. And I'm gonna say, just as important to the visuals as well. And I think when you only focus on logos, like your logo, your colors, you're missing a whole, humans communicate, brands communicate. It's all about communication.
Yeah.
If you didn't figure out how you talk, that's a big miss.
Yeah.
And so really understanding your tone and voice, which is one of the things that I love about Patagonia. Some of the things that they've said that I love is everything we make has an impact on the planet. So like acknowledging that what they're doing is they are owning the fact that it is can be harmful or is harmful. Sometimes the voice is irreverent. They've said things like vote the assholes out, which is like, let's go.
Was that 2016? It was.
It's forever.
Sometimes it's poetic. Sometimes it's poetic and raw. When trees fall, so do we. And it's just like, bruh. It's like so like it really hits you, really meaningful, really thoughtful, and just really speaks about their attitude as a brand and what they really care about. So I think that's just one of the takeaways as I look at the Patagonia brand. Is tone and voice is such a great example of how to leverage your care for whatever you're doing and bringing your tone and voice along with it.
Yeah.
I think my big takeaway from like the conversation and the research and knowing Patagonia is just this super interesting, just like the long arc of business. It's interesting for me to think about, the Impact Collective's vision is that the success of the economy is based on the strength of the collective. That's not talking about B Corp certification. That's not talking about, it's like, so what might that look like 20 years from now? How might we be able to achieve that in different ways? So it's kind of exciting.
Yeah. Governance.
Governance is your takeaway? Surprising.
I know. You're nothing if not consistent.
Well, actually, to your point, like that, they have this very innovative models of governance and thinking about power structures and decision making and how that's in line with the impact they want to make, and that they keep pushing the model, right? Like they keep being like, actually what's out there isn't good enough. Like, let's create the next thing. That's what's inspiring to me. Like, frankly, I think what's out there right now isn't good enough. Like for companies like ours, we don't have something good enough. And so how do we create that next thing? That let's all band together and do that.
Yeah. I think takeaway for me, obviously, is tone and voice. I think one thing I forgot to mention in all this is ownership, which is also along with the tone and voice. So they did the campaign, do not buy this jacket, which is like brilliant, which actually makes you buy the jacket.
Do you think it's manipulation?
Roll your eyes very big. Yeah. So brilliant marketing, but also in line with their purpose.
Yeah.
So I think just seeing a company embrace and be as just blunt as they are, and it's like an encouragement to other brands to be like, hey, you don't really have to always show up professional.
Yeah.
You don't always have to show, like, just authenticity goes a million miles.
Yeah.
So that's my takeaway for me. Well, that's it, y'all. Thank you for joining us. You can get the episode show notes and transcript on our website, sunnybrandspodcast.com.
If you have ideas or suggestions about any companies you'd like for us to take a look at and dissect, you can drop us a line at hello@sunnybrandspodcast.com. And if you want to learn more about the Impact Collective and all of the things that we do to help companies live out their purpose, you can find more information at theimpactcollectivepdx.com.